Iran Daily Briefing, Wednesday, April 8, 2026. The United States and Iran agreed to a 2-week ceasefire on Wednesday, April 8, reaching the deal less than 2 hours before President Trump's deadline expired. Iran committed to reopening the Strait of Hormuz for safe passage. The US and Israel agreed to suspend bombing. The deal was brokered by Pakistan, but as the ink dried, Israeli strikes resumed in Lebanon, and the scope of this ceasefire is already in dispute. We'll get to that dispute in detail. For context, the backdrop to today's agreement is a war that has put the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which a significant share of global oil flows, at the center of a standoff between Tehran and Washington. Trump had set a hard deadline for Iran to reopen that passage or face military escalation. The deadline was 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Tuesday. Iran did not meet it, but Pakistan stepped in with a proposal, a 2-week extension, and before the clock ran out, both sides said yes. Today's episode covers the ceasefire agreement itself, the immediate dispute over whether Lebanon is included, what Iran's 10-point negotiating plan contains, what happened to oil prices, and several other developments on the edges of this story that carry real weight. The agreement came together fast. According to Al Monitor, the ceasefire was reached less than 2 hours before Trump's deadline. France 24 puts it at approximately 1 hour. Either way, it was close. Here is what both sides say they agreed to. The White House confirmed the US will suspend all bombing and military attacks on Iran for 2 weeks. Trump announced this online, saying the US and Israel would halt strikes on Iran immediately. Iran, for its part, committed to reopening the Strait of Hormuz for safe passage during that period. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said Iran agrees to open the strait if attacks against Iran are halted. NPR reports the ceasefire was explicitly conditioned on Iran following through on that commitment. Pakistan brokered the pause. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif announced it on X, saying Iran and the United States had agreed to an immediate ceasefire effective everywhere, including Lebanon. Sharif said he helped secure the agreement. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt confirmed Trump had been made aware of Pakistan's proposal for the 2-week extension. Iran's Foreign Minister Araghchi thanked Pakistani Prime Minister Sharif and Pakistan's military chief Asim Munir publicly for their mediation. The details of the longer-term arrangement are to be negotiated in Islamabad. Iran confirmed talks will begin there on Friday, April 10th. Iran also said clearly that those upcoming talks do not guarantee the end of the war. That distinction matters. Now, the language used in the lead-up to this deal was extraordinarily stark. Trump had threatened that a whole civilization will die tonight if Iran failed to meet his latest deadline. Earlier this week, Trump said he was not at all concerned about the possibility of committing war crimes as he threatened to destroy Iran's bridges and power plants. The UN Secretary-General said he was deeply troubled by that threat. In Tehran, ahead of the deadline, France 24 correspondent Reza Sayar described an eerie still in the Iranian capital. Iranians had formed human chains around bridges and power plants in response to Trump's threats. Tehran had urged young people to gather at potential US and Israeli targets. Then the deal came through. Pro-government demonstrators gathered in the streets of Tehran. Celebrations followed. Iran's state media, according to France 24's Reza Sayar, reporting from Tehran, is framing the ceasefire as a victory against the United States and Israel. Washington and Tehran have opposite explanations for what just happened, and both are telling their own publics a story of success. Now to the immediate complication. Israel's position is not what Pakistan's announcement described. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu said the US-Iran deal does not include Lebanon. Israeli military spokesperson Colonel Avishai Adrei stated the ceasefire with Iran does not include Lebanon and that the battle in Lebanon continues. Adrei also warned residents to evacuate areas south of the Zerani River. The Israeli military renewed strikes on southern Lebanon on Wednesday following the ceasefire announcement. This is in direct conflict with what Pakistan's Prime Minister announced, that the ceasefire was effective everywhere including Lebanon. French President Macron called for Lebanon's inclusion in the deal. Al Monitor, citing 3 Lebanese sources close to Hezbollah, reports that Hezbollah halted fire on northern Israel and on Israeli troops in Lebanon in the early hours of Wednesday as part of the ceasefire. So, on one side, Pakistan says Lebanon is included. Hezbollah appears to have acted as though it is. Macron is calling for it to be. On the other side, Israel says it is not, and Israel's military is striking southern Lebanon. The specific thing to watch: whether Islamabad talks on Friday produce a written text that resolves the Lebanon question explicitly, or whether the ambiguity hardens into a separate conflict track. Iran's 10-point plan. Earlier Wednesday, before the ceasefire was announced, Iran put forward a 10-point proposal for ending the war with the US and Israel. France 24 reports Trump described the plan as workable, a notable characterization from a president who had been threatening annihilation hours earlier. Al Jazeera reports that Iran's negotiations with the US will be based on this 10-point proposal. The plan calls for control over the Strait of Hormuz, though the nature of that control is not defined in available sourcing. What that means in practice, whether it refers to Iranian sovereignty claims, transit protocols, joint oversight, or something else, is not specified in any source available to us today. This plan will be the starting framework when negotiators meet in Islamabad on Friday. The gap between Trump calling it workable and a final agreement is considerable. Watch for whether either side publishes the full text before Friday's talks open. Oil prices markets reacted immediately to the ceasefire news. Crude oil prices fell sharply, dropping by as much as 13 to 15% following the announcement, according to BBC reporting. Al Jazeera notes, investors welcomed the possible resumption of oil and gas flows through the Strait of Hormuz as the driver of that move. For context, French President Macron said on April 8th that approximately 15 countries are planning to facilitate the resumption of traffic through the strait once the ceasefire holds. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer travelled to the Gulf on Wednesday to hold talks with partners aimed at ensuring the strait remains open permanently after the ceasefire period. The price drop reflects market expectation that the strait reopens. Whether that expectation holds depends on Islamabad. If Friday's talks collapse, expect that move to reverse. The Indian crude shipment. A cargo of Iranian crude oil purchased by Indian Oil Corporation is currently en route to India's east coast aboard the tanker Jaya. Middle East Eye reports India has not received Iranian crude oil since 2019, when US pressure forced a halt in purchases. This shipment is now in transit. It is a concrete physical consequence of the changed environment around Iran's oil exports. Whether it signals a broader resumption of Indian purchases of Iranian crude is not yet known. French hostages released. 2 French nationals held in Iran for more than 3 years were released Wednesday. Cécile Kohler and Jacques Paris, who were arrested in Iran in 2022 and charged with espionage, departed Iran at dawn with the French ambassador, traveling to Azerbaijan. French President Macron announced they were on their way home. BBC and the Times of Israel both confirmed the release. The timing, the same day as the ceasefire announcement, is noted in the sourcing, though no source directly attributes the release to the ceasefire negotiations. American journalist freed in Baghdad. U.S. freelance journalist Shelley Kittleson was released on Tuesday, 1 week after being kidnapped in Baghdad. Al Monitor and the Times of Israel both report she was freed by Kateb Hezbollah, an Iran-backed militia. An Iraqi official confirmed the release. No conditions or explanation for the release were reported. The single most consequential open question in the cold open was this: Israel resumed strikes on Lebanon following the ceasefire agreement, even as Pakistan declared the ceasefire covered Lebanon. Here is the full picture. 3 Lebanese sources close to Hezbollah told Al Monitor that Hezbollah halted fire on northern Israel and on Israeli troops in Lebanon in the early hours of Wednesday, treating the ceasefire as applicable to Lebanon. Pakistan's Prime Minister announced on X that the ceasefire was effective, everywhere including Lebanon, effective immediately. France's Macron called for Lebanon's formal inclusion. Israel's position is the opposite. Netanyahu said the deal does not include Lebanon. Military spokesperson Adri confirmed that explicitly and issued evacuation warnings for areas south of the Zerani River. Israeli strikes on southern Lebanon resumed Wednesday. That is the factual state of play. 2 parties to this agreement describe its geographic scope differently. Hezbollah stopped firing. Israel did not. Several specific things to watch in the next 24 to 48 hours. Islamabad talks, Friday, April 10th. This is the first structured contact between US and Iranian negotiators under the ceasefire framework. Watch for whether both sides show up, who leads each delegation, and whether any joint statement addresses the Lebanon question directly. The Lebanon gap. The conflict between Pakistan's announcement and Israel's stated position has not been resolved. Watch for whether the US issues a clarifying statement on whether Lebanon is or is not included. If Washington sides with Israel's interpretation, that creates immediate pressure on Hezbollah's posture. Iran's 10-point plan. Trump called it workable on Wednesday. The next 48 hours may produce either an American counterproposal or a public breakdown of that characterization. Watch for any White House statements that clarify which points are acceptable. Strait of Hormuz. Iran's foreign minister has said the strait reopens if attacks on Iran halt. The ceasefire took effect Wednesday. Watch for confirmation from shipping industry sources, maritime trackers, or official statements that transit has actually resumed. The French hostage return. Kola and Paris departed for Azerbaijan at dawn Wednesday. Their formal return to France and any French government statement on the circumstances of their release may carry diplomatic signals worth noting. Today's episode covered the US-Iran 2-week ceasefire reached on Wednesday, April 8th. Brokered by Pakistan, conditioned on Iran reopening the Strait of Hormuz with talks set for Islamabad on Friday. Alongside the immediate dispute over Lebanon's inclusion, Iran's 10-point negotiating framework, the sharp fall in oil prices, the release of 2 French nationals held in Iran since 2022, and the freeing of an American journalist in Baghdad. Join us tomorrow for the next briefing. If you found today's briefing valuable, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. New episodes every morning.